Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Annual General Meeting of Equestrian Canada. We're going to start our meeting. We'll call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to begin the meeting with a roll call. So I will be reaching out by category. And please unmute yourself and say that you are here when I get to your name. So we will start with category A, Mike Lawrence.
Here.
Ruth Allam.
Here.
Patty Carley.
Here.
Charlene Kostecki. Not here. Victoria Winter. She's here. No, unmute. She's here. She's here. Okay. Terry O'Brennan.
Here.
Thank you. Rhea Pohl. Not here. Elizabeth Quigg.
Here.
Thank you. And Karen Sparks.
Here.
Perfect. Category B, Peter Chitty.
Yeah.
Jess Anstey.
Here.
Nicole Duplessis.
Here.
Heather Findlay.
Here.
Victoria Kendall.
Here.
Lauren Parker.
Here.
Saunders.
Here.
Adrian Smith. She has a question mark. Jerry Sweet. Her name is there. Is she there?
Here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Category C, Caitlin Grguric.
Here.
Jill Barton. No Jill. Tina Collins.
Here.
Dan Gull. Jeff McCormack. Sue Walkenden.
Here.
David Brent.
Here.
Gilles Seguin.
Here.
Andresigmond.
Here.
Okay, so Dorothy, while I do the rest with you, just double check quorum. Okay, Meg Kruger, I'm here. Chris Sorensen.
Here.
Deb Orr.
Yep, here.
Wayne Burwash.
Here.
Greg Collins.
Here.
Charles Q.
Here.
Jane Milton. She's here.
Here.
Thank you. Rob Mitchell.
Here.
Carla Robin.
Here.
Mark Goldman.
Here.
And incoming board director Lisa Robertson.
Here.
Okay, and then we've got, do we have Kirsten Giles on the phone?
I'm here.
Thank you, perfect. Got Gord Peterson.
Here.
Thank you. And then we have Eve Hamlin.
Here.
John Whiteman.
Here.
And then Marilyn, Caroline, Jerry, and Dorothy. Perfect.
And Rachel.
And Rachel.
Kristy.
And Beth.
Oh, Beth, I'm sorry. I don't know why you weren't on the. Beth. Thank you. Perfect. So quorum. Quorum confirmed. Okay, so we will move forward to the first item on the agenda following the opening of the session, which is the approval of the agenda. You have received the draft agenda. It was circulated with the AGM packet on August 31st. So I would like to ask for someone to make a motion to approve the agenda. That would be a voting member.
I will make the motion.
Would you mind also just saying your name because we only see a very small screen?
Nicole Duplessis.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. And would someone second?
Jerry Sweet.
Sorry, once again, please, a bit slower.
Jerry Sweet.
Okay, sorry, I've got Gilles Seguin. We have not received, oh, sorry, we don't do that at this part. So we're as moved by Nicole and seconded by Gilles. I'll ask for everybody to vote on the approval of the agenda. So all those who vote yes, say aye.
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 Okay, thank you. All those who vote no, say nay. Perfect. Our first motion completed. Thank you. The agenda has been adopted. The second item of business here is the approval of the minutes of the 2019 annual general meeting. So the draft minutes were also circulated to you on August 31st in the AGM packet. We have not received any requests for corrections in advance of today's meeting. So I would like to ask, are there any corrections from anybody who was in attendance at the 2019 annual general meeting? Okay. Hearing none, then I would like to ask if there is a voting member who was present last year at the AGM who would make a motion to approve the minutes as circulated.
Hi, it's Terry O'Brennan. I'll move that we approve the minutes as circulated.
Thank you, Terry. And seconded by?
I'll second, Liz.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, we'll do the vote again. So those who vote yes, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. And any who say no, please say nay. Okay, super. So those have been approved as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so we can now, everyone can just shift on to mute for the next few minutes. I'm going to move into the President's report. But before we do, I'd like to take a moment to honor a member of our community, Zara Buren of Oakville, Ontario, who passed away yesterday after an accident while trail riding. At only 14 years old, Zara was a promising young talent and a constant source of positivity in the eventing community. Our thoughts are with her family and friends during these difficult times. As we move to the President's update, I would like to officially welcome you to the 2020 Annual General Meeting, and also welcome those who are watching on Facebook Live. A few quick points for those who are watching on Facebook Live to be aware of. If you are watching in that manner, we unfortunately can't answer your questions if you're writing comments in the comment bar. Questions for the AGM that will come up later on in the Q&A session were provided to the voting members in advance of the board meeting, and they were done by email. If you still have questions after today and found that your questions were not answered, we will provide an email in our follow-up press release, and you can submit your questions and we'll answer those as well. There are two time periods that are reflected in this annual general meeting. The first time period that we assess is our fiscal year. Our fiscal year, just as a reminder, was April 1st, 2019 until March 31st, 2020. Understanding that other financial questions may arise today, particularly due to COVID-19 and the impact on Equestrian Canada and our operations, we will do our very best to answer all of them, understanding that the current fiscal year is currently ongoing and has not been completed or audited. The second time period we review during the annual general meeting aligns with the organization's activity during the prior board year. So in our case, the board year runs from October 1st, or technically as soon as this annual general meeting ends, until today. So as soon as I mentioned, this annual general meeting ends, the incoming directors will take over the leadership of the organization. Each AGM, also both the board and management prepare annual reports of activity. These reports were circulated to you in the AGM packet, and for those who are also watching online, they were uploaded to the website today as well. These reports outline in quite a bit of detail the progress that the organization has made over the last 12 months. So my update is going to be a high-level update, understanding that many of you will have read or will be able to read those reports. In 2019 to 2020, our board year started as would typically be expected in October. We had a list of priorities coming out of the strategic plan, and those we had inherited from the 2018 to 2019 board year, again, outlined in detail in the board's annual report. Now, to highlight a few of the significant priorities that we had last year, board was to see that our interim CEO initiates full incorporation of our 2018 to 2022 strategic plan into operational management and operational planning. We were also to complete the third and final phase of our organizational review, in particular, to conduct a voting member structure assessment, i.e. how the governance is set up, how it works or does not work for us, and how we want to make changes to improve how the governance works. And finally, one of our core priorities was to complete the recruitment of a full-time CEO search with the transition to follow the 2020 Tokyo Olympics in November 2020. These projects commenced and made considerable and realistic progress by the spring of 2020, including the following 4 points. We did complete a draft operational committee map that aligns operational teams, so that is staff and volunteer units, with the organizational review and the strategic plan. We completed an assessment of the voting member structure, a draft assessment, and developed a draft revised voting structure framework. We planned and scheduled a multi-day in-person discovery session, which was to assess the role of industry within EC's scope. This was in response to Category C's request for clarity coming out of the 2019 AGM. And unfortunately, this was scheduled for early April, and due to COVID-19 was not undertaken in its original design due to travel and health restrictions. And finally, we secured and signed a contract with an HR specialist, a consultant, to work with the board's CEO search committee to oversee the job description, job posting, and recruitment process for our full-time CEO search. The HR consultant is also tasked to screen applicants based on the provided skills matrix, providing final interview candidates to the board. Now, as we know, with the arrival of March 2020 came the arrival of COVID-19, and our lives changed completely. By late March, so had changed the focus and priorities of the organization from the original starting point this year. From March to May, the board of directors held weekly COVID-19 meetings, working with the interim CEO, Eve, our team, PTSOs, and partners to respond to necessary operational and public health changes throughout the crisis. Some of these COVID-19 priorities included the following 4 points. EC and PTSOs worked collaboratively to interpret and communicate public health mandates impacting our sport and sector. We prioritized the health of our team and our financial capacity, facing an immediate loss of revenue as COVID-19 hit. We approved a revised COVID-19 operational budget based on the team's assessment of available federal funding, non-deferrable expenses, and the sustainability and well-being of our team and our organization. The board instructed the interim CEO to proceed in making appropriate operational changes to ensure the organization finishes the current 2020-2021 fiscal year with a balanced budget without using our reserves or debt to sustain operations despite COVID's impact on our revenue. Our team, led by interim CEO Eve Hamlin, has been working throughout COVID-19 to support safe and steady return to activity and return to play. And we are prioritizing the documentation of lessons learned, working with our governance committee and Eve to document the massive lessons that we've undertaken this year and ensure that the institutional knowledge that we've gained in navigating this global pandemic will be available to future leaders of this organization. So on top of the COVID-19 priorities, we also had to make important decisions about regular tasks as well. The full-time CEO recruitment that was to take place from March to August was put on hold due to the economic and health crisis. It will resume in 12 months later, from March to August in 2021. And the contract of the HR specialist engaged to lead this process in 2020 was revised, and she has been retained for the new timeframe. EC has made a significant commitment over the past 2 years to build out the National Equine Traceability and Equine ID program. This was initially prioritized in the 2017 to 2018 board year. This year, the board approved an equine ID supplier discovery project, and this is going to fully assess the options, stakeholders, financial model, and budget of this proposed program. A communications policy was drafted by EC to outline the various stakeholders, how and when they should receive communications, and assessing our strengths and weaknesses in communications and proposed solutions. This policy is now being developed into an operational communications plan, which is being led by the communications and leadership team in the office. We approved several safe sport and code of conduct policies this spring, some in support of the coach licensing program requirements. Diversity, inclusion, and equality has been a very important movement this year. and it is one where EC is actively assessing the shortcomings of Canadian equestrianism, how we can take a leadership role in progress and inclusion in order to support that this sport and activity is accessible to all Canadians, and where participation grows and is reflective of the many facets and heritage of the Canadian population. And finally, as I noted earlier, the board completed a voting member structure assessment early this summer. And this created two distinct outcomes, and I just want to spend a minute to talk about this. Outcome one was the definition of roles and responsibilities of the board, operations, and voting membership, and the approval of several important bylaw definitions, which I'm going to highlight in a little more detail in a moment. The second outcome was the realization that the act of commencing a discussion with the current voting members about changing the voting member governance structure is a large and complex undertaking, and it impacts many groups and, of course, all categories and category voting members. Therefore, the initial process was revised to take place as follows. Step one, we affirm the defined roles and responsibilities of the board, operational teams, and voting members, which is taking place in part today with the vote on the proposed bylaw changes. Step two, we commence the voting member structure revision conversations and consultation meetings with the three categories over the next 12 months, recognizing that though we don't have a time pressure constraint like we did the last time we revised the bylaws and the voting structure, we do prioritize consultation with our stakeholders and know we will need a majority vote, a supermajority vote with several very different groups to achieve consensus. And then step three, to bring the proposed changes to the revised voting member structure to the 2021 AGM for vote. So again, I'm just going to spend another quick moment to touch on the point I made earlier regarding the progress made with definitions, because this has taken a huge amount of work and an in-depth understanding of the intricacies of the organization and an acknowledgement of the history of EC and our equestrian community, plus the fundamental need for us to embrace change and evolution. Definitions were approved by the board this year to clarify important areas that have been gray areas in the past. Board definitions were made, though only two have made it to the AGM for vote, as there was not enough support by voting members for the other two. However, those will be reassessed and will be brought back to the Assembly at the 2021 AGM. The two definitions that were approved included the active equine and active equine facility, which support our advocacy to the CRA for agricultural taxation improvements for equine businesses. In this definition, we also clarified that EC has no jurisdiction in the processing and pharmaceutical sectors of the equine industry. Definitions of the roles and responsibilities for how we operate. Why is this important? Because without this clarity, the organization operates ineffectively with increased tension between parties and duplication of efforts. So I'm going to touch on the three definitions of roles. The first being the role of the board. Our role is clearly defined to focus on a not-for-profit board's three core responsibilities. One, creating the strategic vision and plan for the organization, developing policy to keep the organization on its strategic track, and the fiscal responsibility for the performance of the organization. To help achieve this, the board is shifting 3 board committees into the operational committee structure, leaving only the following committees left for the board: strategic planning, audit and finance, governance, nominations, and HR. And the role of the voting membership, i.e. the 27 people at this meeting that represent the larger equestrian community. Bylaw changes that are proposed at this AGM will clarify how individuals become voting members, focusing action as an output of the operational teams, i.e. staff and volunteer operational committees, whereas the voting members' role is specifically to elect directors, receive the audited financials, and approve bylaw changes. Voting members hold the board and the organization accountable. If they don't like the direction the board or the organization is taking, then they can elect different directors, and today they can approve the bylaw changes as well. And finally, the role of operations. An operational committee revitalization must accompany the above 2 governance changes for the transitions I've explained to be effective. operational committees working effectively alongside EC staff. Just like the board needs its committees and can't make decisions without its committees, operational committees and our team must rely on each other and need each other to make decisions using both sports system and equestrian expertise. So in closing, I'm currently wrapping up my 3rd year as president of the organization, and as a volunteer myself, I always take every chance that I can to thank both paid staff and also the many volunteers who populate committees, the board, who volunteer at equestrian facilities and horse shows. When you sit in this role and you have a chance to see the big picture view of the equestrian sector in our country, you get a fundamental understanding of the diverse representation that we interact with across sport, breeding, recreation, learning, and professional careers. This ecosystem is filled with incredibly passionate and experienced people who all bring different perspectives and knowledge to the table. I'm also a big believer in service, of giving back to the equestrian community, and to recognizing that if we really want to see the change that we believe our industry needs in order to adapt and prosper in the future, then we need to continue to put aside our differences and work together. So as we move into the core agenda of the 2020 AGM, I would like to share a special few final thanks. First, to our team, our staff, who have been through a very difficult time in recent years with leadership changes, and then this year with COVID-19, and who have risen to achieve and support great progress this year, considering the incredible uncertainty we've all faced, never having gone through a global pandemic of this magnitude in our lives. And second, to the volunteers, whether they sit on the board, on board committees, on operational committees, and for those who represent the equestrian community as our voting members. Specifically, I would like to thank 2 of our board officers, Chris Sorensen, VP1, and Doug Orr, VP2, who spend considerable time working with me to lead the board and the organization. And I would like to thank 2 outgoing directors, board directors this year, Beth Underhill, who completes her board term, and Robin Kennedy, who unfortunately had to resign from the board this year. Finally, I would like to thank Mike Lawrence for the time that he spent as chair of Category A and as a voting member. So that concludes my update. I'd like to move on to the next section, which is the report of the Finance and Audit Committee. So I will introduce Rob Mitchell, the chair of the Finance Committee, to give an overview of the annual report of the committee.
Thank you very much, Meg, and good evening, good afternoon to everybody. My main job here today is to present the audited financial statements for the year ended March 31st, 2020, and discuss the audit and introduce the auditor, who will also speak about the audit. I'd first like to thank the volunteer members of the Finance and Audit Committee. We have about a dozen meetings every year, and these people bring their talents and experience and knowledge to the table for the benefit of the organization, and they're a very dedicated bunch. I'd also especially like to thank John Whiteman, Chief Financial Officer, for his tireless efforts to keep improving the functioning of the finance area. Through John's efforts, the department managers at EC are now in a much better position to both budget looking ahead and to control expenses in their areas. So turning to the audited financial statements, they have been distributed, and just a reminder, it feels like a long time ago when our fiscal year ended March 31st, 2020. And most of the impact of COVID has occurred post the year end. I would like to just give an overview of our operating results for the year. For those who have the financial statements, this is the statement of operations, page 2 after the audit report. It shows that for the fiscal year 2020, we ended the year with a deficit, an operating deficit, about $95,000. And that compares to an operating surplus the previous year of about $70,000. So over the 2 years, we're either side of break even. I would say the result for 2020, the actual result was better than what we had projected when we budgeted for the year. And the principal reason for that, I would say, is better control of expenses. Revenues for the most recent year declined slightly by 2% overall, or about $140,000 compared to the previous years. We did see revenues decline very rapidly starting in about mid-February and dropping to almost zero by the end of March. So that was the initial impact of COVID, as events were canceled. Sport license sales just dropped off as people started to realize what the impact was going to be. So I think absent that fall off at the end of the year, I think we would have ended with higher revenue this year than the previous years. The major areas where revenue fell off were sports licenses, affiliate fees, equine medications, and product sales. On the expense side, expenses overall were virtually unchanged from the previous years. Our largest expense is salaries and benefits, and they were at $2.4 million each of the previous years. I think our headcount of employees dropped 1 year to the next, as some positions that were vacant were not replaced as that happened. But those savings were offset by payouts for principally vacation payouts for departing employees who had accumulated vacation benefit, and some severance payments. Discipline expenses, you'll see, were significantly higher this year than the previous year by about $500,000, with the increase attributed to supporting Canadian equestrians outside of Canada, especially the Pan Am Games. Many expense categories you'll see are lower this year than last, and as I said earlier, I think this is partly due to the improved expense management practice as instituted by Eve and John. The balance sheet, at April or March 31st this year remains robust. We're very liquid. Cash is down a little bit as sales tapered off towards the end of the period, but our significant term deposit is up this year versus last year, as simply due to accumulated interest in that account. Accounts payable were down. I think we're just paying our suppliers a little more quickly. And deferred revenue is down at year end. And again, that's a result of COVID. I won't say much about post 2020 other than, or post this year end into this year, except as you can imagine, revenues have been at very low levels, especially in the early months of COVID, and started to build again over the summer. EC has been able to take advantage of several government programs, as well as take significant steps to control expenses. So as reporting, we still consider this to be a financially strong and liquid organization. So the audit was completed by KPMG, and unique now is that is done virtually all remotely. The audit report is a clean, unqualified report. And at this point, I'd just like to introduce Kirsten Giles, who's manager in charge of our account at KPMG and let her just comment on the audit process and the audit report.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Rob. So basically, as the organization's appointed public accountant, KPMG did perform the financial statement audit for the year ended March 31st, 2020. And as has been mentioned many times, I think even with the unprecedented year that we have all no doubt experienced on some level, we were still able to complete all of the audit procedures as we designed. We didn't identify any misstatements or significant control deficiencies, which then enables us to issue what we call an unmodified or a clean audit opinion on these statements. This is obviously what organizations should be striving for and to achieve. So we would like to recognize the efforts made by everybody in the organization in being able to achieve this result. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will now move forward. We're in the acceptance of the financial statements section. So I will state that the voting members have received the 2019 to 2020 approved audited financial statements. They were sent out in the AGM packet on August 31st. And they've also received today the auditor's report and the report from the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. So the audited financial statement approval process is a 5-part process. The first step, staff complete the annual financials up to the year end of March 31, 2019. That was complete. The financials are audited by the third-party auditor, KPMG. That was complete. The audited financials are reviewed and approved by the board's finance committee. That was completed. And the audited financials are then approved by the board. This is the legal requirement, and this was completed in August. So the last step is outlined in the new Not-for-Profit Act. So that's the act that came into effect in 2015, is that the approved audited financials are then presented to the voting members at the annual general meeting, and that the members are provided with the opportunity to ask any questions. Now, as of 2015, the new act is actually not require the approval of the audited financial statements by the voting members. I recognize in the past years, we've continued to do so, but it's technically incorrect and it's confusing. So this year, we're going to realign with the Not-for-Profit Act, and we're going to proceed with the question period on the financials, but we don't need to ask for a motion from the voting members. So I'd like to take the opportunity now to ask the voting members, are there any questions on the audited financials or the Audit and Finance Committee annual report? Any questions? So this will be the main time period. You can also ask questions later, but this would be the main time period that we would ask if anybody does have questions on the audited financials. Okay, so hearing none, thank you very much. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kirsten. If there are any further questions, you may also address them after the meeting to the CEO. So Rob, if you'd like to take us into the appointment of the auditor.
Thanks, Meg. The Finance and Audit Committee recommended to the board, and the board agreed that we would like to reappoint KPMG to be the auditor for EC for the current fiscal year. So that is our recommendation.
Then I would ask, we would require a voting member to move that motion, and someone then to second it. So is there someone who would make that motion?
Yeah, Liz, I so move.
Thank you, Liz. And a seconder?
Caitlin Grguric, I'll second.
Oops, I got Caitlin. Is that Caitlin Grguric?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comment on that, the motion that's on the table? Okay, hearing no questions, then we'll go to the vote. So for the motion on the table to approve KPMG as our auditor for the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year, moved by Liz, seconded by Caitlin. All those who vote yes, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay, and any who vote no, please say nay. Okay, so that motion has passed. Thank you very much. So we're going to move into section H, bylaw changes. So I would like to call on Charles Q. Are you still there, Charles Q, to give a brief introduction to this session?
Yeah, I'm there. Sorry that I don't have the video of my personage, but my rural bandwidth internet service is not handling the storm and the number of people that are on the service right now. So audio only. I just want to quickly go through what we're asking for on the bylaw changes. In general, is to this is the start of making sure the board is focused on strategic stuff and getting that strategic focus with the board. It's also about enabling the operational, starting to enable the operational side of the EC better. And then finally, it's the changes are to get rid of a lot of the transitional and administrative stuff, some administrative stuff out of the bylaws. So we're starting, we've had, this is the second, we've completed 2 full cycles of the governance system that came because of the Not-for-Profit Act. And as a result of that lived experience now, we have some pretty good ideas of where things aren't working. And our governance structure is designed to enable us to work better together, and we need to take away the barriers that are doing it. And I give full marks to the people that put this together the first time. They were up against some pretty tight deadlines for government, and getting this through was amazing. And so even though we don't like some parts of this, and it's maybe not being as effective for us, we're compliant with the Not-for-Profit Act, so that's a really good plus. And now we've got time to work on better enabling us through some governance changes. And the bylaw changes that we're putting forward is just the first small step, and then we're going to get into those substantive conversations starting in October. And the goal is to have a structure that better enables us, and to have it approved at the next AGM, so that we're not having these conversations about who sits at the table and how does the table work and all that kind of stuff. We're now starting to really focus on substantive issues and that are important to the community, and moving forward with them. So that's the start of this. If you want to put up that quick summary, I'll just go through the 13 changes that we're looking at as a reminder. And for those that are watching this through Facebook, this will give them a quick update as to what we're looking at. And I'm just going to, as we look at them, I'm just going to, yeah, that's a little bit bigger. That's great. My weak eyes wasn't seeing that very well. So the first change is just administrative, because we're just looking at a title change. The next 2 changes are definitions. This is what Meg was talking about earlier about the equine and the active equine facility. This is to better scope what EC does, and also to help us working with government in getting better support from government for what we do. We had 4 definitions that we were going to put in there initially. One was on industry, and the other 2 were on industry and recreation. But the discussion we had in the summer with the voting members, we realized there was much more to that, much more work needed to do on those things, and so we just removed them. Those 2 definitions will be some of the first discussions we have when we start the next round. Number 4 is the size of the board and the ability to increase and decrease it. Our articles of incorporation allow us to have a board between 7 and 14, and this is just making it more specific so that people can see when we would increase the board or decrease the board, and making it more transparent. The 5 is we're just deleting transitional stuff. 6 is just more changes, some minor changes to that come as a result of number 4. Number 7 is that directors cannot sit on operating committees as an active member. They can be, attend on request, can be attend an operational committee, but this is again to keep the board focused on strategic things and avoid any conflict of interest. So this just makes that a fact that they cannot sit on operating committees. Number 8 is just the removal of redundant wording. 9 is some transition processes that provisions that can be deleted. 10 is again just wording support the change of size of the board. 11 is better clarity on directors attending at board of directors meetings to make sure that if a director misses so many meetings, 3 meetings in a row, then we have to question, do they have the time to actually be on the board? Number 12 is redundant wording again. Number 13 is to allow operating committees to create their own TORs. This the board will still ratify them at the end, and that's just to as a check and balance to make sure that that the committee is in alignment with the board's strategic vision. But right now, as it stands, the board, the governance committee, writes all the TORs for all the operational committees, and that makes no sense. I mean, I think at the beginning, when this was created, a cookie cutter approach that made every committee look alike was a good starting point. But I think there's nuances with every committee, and I think those committees need to work with the CEO to create their operational plan for how they're going to, the work they're going to do that aligns with the strategic vision of EC. So this is a major change, and it's enabling the operating committees to get on with doing substantive work. And 14 and 15 are just administrative, change of the audit committee so that it aligns with the audit and finance committee and the governance manual, and the dates to reflect ratification. So all in all, we're not changing anything in the voting structure. That discussion on what the voting structure looks like and where it should go and what kind of effect we're trying to achieve is what we're going to start the conversations off in October, and that discussion is going to require a supermajority to pass it. It can't just be 50+1. So, but that's the long-term discussion. The short-term is that these bylaws are being set in place to correct a bunch of administrative stuff, separate the board from operations, better separate the board from operations, and empower the operational, start to empower the operational side to deal with substantive issues. Any questions?
Actually, Q, before we do questions, I'd like to ask someone, one of the voting members, if they can make a motion from.
I'll make that motion. I'll make that motion, it's Jill.
Jill, thank you. And a seconder, please.
I'll second it, Peter Trudy.
Thanks, Peter. Are there any questions or comments for Q on the proposed bylaw changes? Okay, hearing no questions, the motion on the table to approve the bylaw changes as proposed, moved by Gilles, seconded by Peter. All those who vote in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And those who are opposed, please say nay. Okay, perfect. So that motion has passed. Thank you. So Q, I have an action here that you will be presenting the revised governance and operations manual to the board at the upcoming October board meeting. And once that is done, they'll be circulated with TOR changes to the categories for discussion. So we'll record that in the minutes.
Yep, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you, Q. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're moving on to the next section, which is the Q&A period. So this session is here to discuss questions that are brought forward from each category, and also those who are brought forward to the categories on behalf of the equestrian community. As you know, this year we decided that we would not request questions in advance or limit questions to the voting members or the chairs. So with this new process, we will do our very best to answer all the questions, knowing that if there are any specific questions that we don't have access to data, etc., we'll provide them to you following the meeting within 7 to 10 business days. So what we'll do, just to keep things simple, I'll go by category. So I'm going to start with category A and see if the chair or any of the members within the category have questions to ask.
Okay. Thank you very much, Meg. It's Mike Lawrence. I would like to thank the EC Board of Directors for all their valuable commitment that they make to the organization and the phenomenal amount of time they commit. So there were some questions that we did receive, and we put together a few together, which I've forwarded to you today. The EC Board has expressed a commitment to distance themselves from operations while making a decision to hire people with extensive sport administration, but not horse expertise, for key positions. By removing itself from operations and no longer allowing board members to sit on operational committees, how will the board ensure an accurate and transfer flow of communication between itself and operational committees? And there's a second part, which is, will volunteer committees be given more meaningful input and decision-making authority in day-to-day discipline-specific decisions, so our stakeholders feel reassured that informed decisions are being made by people with extensive equestrian experience?
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for sending those questions in advance. So I'll answer a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you to make a few comments as well. You know, several years ago, the board took an operational role really out of necessity when we faced an issue of being in our position without having a CEO leading the organization. That was never intended to be permanent. And in fact, we saw how a continued role of the board within operations, whether or not it was unintentional, was very damaging to our team and our performance as a whole. The board does not want to be in operations. We believe that our staff and the operational committees are able to work closely with each other as a team, and as you say, rely on each other to make decisions for the organization in the combination of the equestrian expertise and also the sports system expertise. So just as the board trusts and relies on the board committees to help us make our own informed decisions, the operational committees and staff must work together as well as integrated units for the best interest of the organization. So that's from the perspective of the board being involved or not being involved in operations, and in trusting that the system that we're setting forth from an operational capacity is going to work. Eve, would you like to comment a little bit on the operational committee revitalization and the communication piece?
Yes, thank you, Meg. You know, this is always a very important question, as we all have in mind that we want to create, you know, an organization that is highly efficient and with the right level of expertise. That's for sure. And then the integration of that structure with, you know, working on people that sit on the staff, you know, having developed experience over the years, but having a clear synergy with operation committees and having a clear line of communication. So this is key. The operation committees are a tremendous amount of support and advice and interaction to ensure that all the aspects to be considered are taken into consideration behind any decision that need to be made. So it's going to be a continuous monitoring of making sure that we are enhancing the expertise across the board and make sure that there is no gap at the end.
Mike, are you there? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does. I mean, it's a conventional thing for the board to not be in governance, in operations, and so it's more the fact that it has evolved in a way that is how some people, stakeholders, have been getting their information through the fact that there's communication, and as long as there's a clear, coherent operational structure that's being proposed, and I know E proposed something to the members, and as long as that's functional so that we can actually, there's information being relayed between all parts of the organization, I think it should work well. So I'm optimistic or hopeful that will fill that void that was being filled by the fact that board members were sitting on operational committees. So I will go to my second question, which, as we know, EC disciplines are very different, and the issues facing disciplines with under 50 sport license holders are different than those disciplines that have over 12,000. Will discipline committees be given latitude to customize their own terms of reference, given that it has proven to be difficult to make uniform TORs that apply to all of our unique disciplines? And Charles did effectively answer that, which we appreciate. So the jumping committee, as an example of that, was very engaged and represented stakeholder groups better when it was populated based on skill sets. And there was a competition representative, athlete representative, owner, coaching, rules, finance. Each person had a role. And it was very successful for many years. And then after the last bylaw change, all these positions were eliminated, which was against the discipline's wishes. And we feel that stakeholder representation and volunteer engagement suffered as a result. Can committees have the latitude to populate themselves in a manner that they feel best serves their stakeholders?
And I know Q did touch on part of this already before when we were going through the bylaw change overview. I think, and Q, maybe if you're there in a minute, I'll ask you to say a few words, but we've really had, again, as he brought in the governance section, we've had a chance to see this new voting structure and this governance structure work for several cycles. And so we certainly can see the areas where things are working and where things are not working. And we have that ability right now to start that conversation and to dive deep into the governance and the terms of reference and see what it is that we need to do to change to make things work better for us. So Q, do you want to talk at all about elaborate any further on the comment about the terms of reference and the board ratifying?
Yeah, the reason the board is still going to ratify them, because we don't want committees that have 100 people on them. So there's got to be a little give and take here. We're going to be expecting. We want committees to sit down, have a conversation. Who do you need on the team? Put that together, and the rationale for that. And if it's 12 people, then it's 12 people. If it's just 5 people, it's 5 people. Even if it's 15 or 20, that's fine. If you've got if you have the rationale for it, there is a cost associated with having a resource bill, and that's where the CEO has to weigh in on these things too. But at the same time, the board is going to want to see these committees using good governance practices as well. So we expect to see opportunities for the equestrian community to be able to serve on these communities, on these committees. So there has to be a rotation in there. If you guys figure out, if a committee figures out a certain way of doing it and it works for them, great. We're fine with it. But there has to be a rotation in there so that people have the opportunity to get onto these committees. There has to be a work plan. There has to be a report at the end of the year so people know what these committees have done and what issues are being worked on. Those are the things that the board is going to stress. That's what we want. How you get there is going to be up to you guys, that particular group of people with that expertise to come to do. But there are a bunch of whats that we do want to have in play. You guys have to figure out the how and write it so it works for you. And that's done with the committee and the CEO, who has to manage that work upward into the and make it and communicate that to the board. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's refreshing to know that there will be some latitude. Like in the past, we were told that it was constant rejection of proposals. And so the fact that obviously in good faith, the committees would have to adhere to certain guidelines and be fit a format of Equestrian Canada committees, but they'd like to have the latitude to reflect what has traditionally worked well for them and to be somewhat unique, to reflect how unique each committee is. Okay. Then the other was the discipline chairs, and particularly some of the FEI disciplines who do not have EC discipline managers have voiced concerns that they're in the dark a bit and that they're not part of the decision-making process or informed of what's happening across the Federation. This has gotten worse since the departure of John Garner, who was a contact person for many of those disciplines. What is the plan to engage the disciplines within EC government structure to ensure that they're regularly going to be informed and consulted, and that information will work its way, feedback will work its way up as opposed to just being advised of what decisions have been made?
Thanks. I'm going to pass this one right to Yves as it impacts the team.
Thank you, Mike, for the question. So it's, again, if we connect that with the Committee of Revitalization and the TORs and all that. So at this point, we have someone that has been identified within the organization to supply services to let's say FEI discipline committees. Some were more active than others. So some are closer from being compliant to what the committee should achieve in terms of identifying, validating priorities and area to focus and fully align with strategic initiative. So we have internally assigned, I would say, staff to support, but in that next step, this is going to be fully integrated in ensuring that the need and the reality of all disciplines are taken into consideration, and to open up the conversation with each committee on the next step and what would create a cohesion from one committee to the other, as well as identifying key areas in terms of focus, in terms of objective to be developed within, and then engage volunteers in a positive way to work and create synergy between the leadership and staff and committees, and really to come to a point where we achieve what we all have in mind.
Mike, are you there?
Thank you. Also, there was 4 questions that all the categories received from Jennifer Anstey that we decided to submit to you as a group. So just to forward you. So just confirming that you received those questions. And also, Terry, I don't know if you received by email your answer that, or if you'd like to ask a question about the CSAC.
Yeah, hi. I just was really interested in the status of the Competition Structural Alignment Committee. I'm assuming that it's going forward. I saw in your report that they were talking about phase 2. I know COVID has derailed everything, but I'm just wondering about the status of that, whether it's actually being worked on, and assuming that it is, what is the mechanism by which it will communicate with the stakeholders?
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, and thanks for reading that in the report. It was one of the tasks that the board had prioritized for the current board year, And unfortunately, as you mentioned with COVID, we really found that the time that we had to focus on projects was severely compressed. So CSAC was not prioritized during the the prior board year, so leading up to today. We are going to begin an assessment of our membership products, our competition structure, and our value proposition. That's going to be unfolding in the next few years. And CSAC, which is the Competition Structural Alignment Committee, that phase 2 is going to be reintegrated into that process. I know that your question was also relating to, there was a question about the TOR and the mission and so forth. We did set out with a 3-phase competition structural alignment review. The first phase was complete. It has a terms of reference. It doesn't exactly have a mission. It has actionable outcomes that it needs to achieve. But again, we're going to have to, as we restart in our assessment of that, we're going to have to bring that back to the board. We need to align it with the strat plan. We need to align it with Eve and the team and the goals of what we're working on this year. So it will come back. It will come back to the board in the next few months, and you can be assured that we'll be working very closely with disciplines through the process. We're not going to embark on that without that critical consultation.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think that's at the end. Just I guess we can be hopeful that some of the communication issues that we've been that have been brought up by the members over time can be addressed by some of the operational plans that that are being made. So let's hope.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, one question, the questions that you brought forward, the other 4 questions, would you like us to answer them, or would you like us to answer them in writing? What's the thought process?
However you would like to do, as long as they receive a response. I mean, if you want to answer some of them this evening, if time permits.
Okay. Well, why don't we go through the other categories, and we'll take a check on how everyone's doing from a timing perspective, and then come back to that.
Certainly.
So we'll go to category B.
Thank you, Meg. First of all, I'd like to echo Mike's comments and gratitude for the extreme amount of time that the board puts into the work around Equestrian Canada. It's having been on many boards myself, I know how difficult it is, particularly for volunteers, so thank you. And from the perspective of the PTSOs and category B, I'd particularly like to thank Meg, Chris, and Craig Collins on the board, who are the people who interact with us most. And at the staff level, Eve, James, Kristy, and Rachel, in particular through the COVID time, which was very difficult for us in the provinces as well, did a tremendous job of working with us. So thank you for that. In terms of questions, we have many questions on governance and potential bylaw changes, etc. However, they, as you said, and as Charles said earlier, or Q, as everybody calls them, have really been deferred until next year. And so we will wait in anticipation for those discussions. And I don't have any questions beyond that. I'll throw it open to the rest of category B to see if there are any questions. We have had a number of meetings, including on Sunday evening, and that was our position as of that moment in time. So if anybody else in category B has a question, put your hand up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
So we'll go then to category C.
Good evening, everyone. Caitlin here. I will also echo Mike and Peter's comments on the efforts of EC's board and staff members. Thank you all for being there and getting through this and having patience with us all. We look forward to your continued efforts and work. I believe that the general concerns and comments have been addressed by the other categories and the questions that were pre-submitted. No additional questions were forwarded to me as Category C chair, but I will open it up to the other Category C members present for any additional questions they may have. Please raise your hand. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
So we do have a few minutes, so maybe for all the categories, I know you all received the 4 questions that were submitted, so maybe we'll just take a few minutes to go through those because I did prepare some answers. I guess, would anybody like to read the questions or should Mike, are you
If
gonna...
you would like, Caitlin, I can read them.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't have them in front of me. Yeah.
okay.
All right, I will proceed. These questions have been submitted by Jennifer Anstey from Horse Media Group. Question 1. EC continues to suffer from a serious lack of communication. Registered participants, voting members, industry stakeholders, and staff have all voiced their concerns about a lack of communication at all levels of the organization. In fact, this issue was cited as part of the reason for the resignation of Category A Chair Mike Lawrence. How is EC leadership proposing to address this chronic problem?
Okay. So I noted in my board annual report and also in the introduction that part of how we are addressing our communications issues is through the development of a communications policy. This was presented to and discussed with the board at a board meeting earlier this summer, and now it's in process of being integrated into an operational communications plan led by EC Communications, the team, and also leadership. So the plan really maps out the various stakeholders that are involved with EC, what we need to communicate to each group, how that best should be done and what methods that should be done with, and who's responsible within the organization. And then that last stage of the process is that Eve and the leadership team will be bringing back the final communications policy to the board, either at the October or November board meeting for final approval. So that's on the policy side. I think it's also important to note that there's 2 other pieces to that. One is the governance, and I know we talk about it a lot. It's obviously a core focus area for the board. But when, as I mentioned earlier, when there's an ineffective governance structure, ineffective communication also increases, as does frustration. So our job is to ensure that there's a strong governance structure that connects all of the groups as part of this larger organization. And then we need a clear definition of who's responsible for what in each area and how they should interact with each other. So this connects with how the board is interacting with operational teams, how operational teams interact with each other. So that's the staff and volunteer committee interaction. And then also how we as an organization interact with our partners or affiliates in the greater community. So that's the one piece. And then of course there's the human side of the equation. And there's always the risk of making communication errors, such as not communicating enough or unintentionally communicating the wrong thing. So in this space, we need to ensure that our relationships and our desire to collaborate are strong. And this can be really difficult because many people have been involved in the organization for many years. And as the history of EC lingers around us, it continues to impact today's culture. And the board and the organization, we're very aware of our culture. And we know that in some areas, our interactions with stakeholder groups are positive, and in other areas, they're not. And so as we constantly take that pulse, we know that there are areas that we need to continue to drive and change, and areas that we need to revisit and take a look at how we're doing things and make changes. So I know that's a long question. It's not just as easy as writing policy. There are all the working pieces that make the policies come to life. But that's the answer on how we're addressing the communication issues.
Thank you, Meg. Question 2. Many, including a former CEO, have cited the importance of equestrian industry experience as a necessity for the CEO of EC. As the hunt for the next CEO will be underway in 2021, has EC placed any importance on candidates having equestrian experience? If the right candidate does not have equestrian experience, how will operations address this deficiency?
Absolutely. And again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in my update, the board decided to secure and sign a contract with an HR specialist. That's an external third-party consultant. And this person is going to work with the board's CEO search committee and oversee the process from creating the job description, doing the job posting, and then the full recruitment process for that full-time CEO search. So that consultant is also tasked to screen applicants based on the skills matrix that the board has put together and provide final candidates to be interviewed by the board. So the HR consultant is actually an equestrian, but also a professional HR recruiter. And when you're looking at the skills matrix, obviously that's going to include several critical skills that we want our full-time CEO to embody. Some of the examples of skills will, of course, include equestrian industry expertise, but it also includes leadership, support system knowledge, experience with board interaction, financial management, etc. So the HR consultant for us is an important part of providing that assessment of each candidate and assessing how their skills meet the criteria that we've provided. And then she will also be managing the recruitment campaign and also be involved in some headhunting. So from a decision process, the board CEO search committee is going to be led by the president, and this group will assess and interview the final selected candidates that are brought forward by the HR consultant, and then they will present their recommendations to the board of directors who will make their decision. So to address the last part of the question, which related to if the CEO performs well in some areas of the skill matrix and less in others, for example, in the equestrian industry expertise, effective leadership brings industry expertise into the organization's management decisions through our staff and our operational committee members. Again, I know I keep saying like the board, but the board doesn't make decisions without the expertise and the understanding and the guidance of our board committees. So in that same sense, the management team is going to be relying on its operational committees of industry experts to help in providing the expertise when decisions are being made.
Thank you again, Meg. Question 3. EC's governance has been roundly criticized since its introduction for being poorly structured. Over 2 years ago, the head of governance, Charles Q., acknowledged these serious issues and promised changes within a year. As there has been no reform, what has been the cause of the delay? Are there any changes being planned? What do they look like? When will they be implemented?
Thanks. So I know we've already talked about this quite a bit, so I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. Again, as Q had mentioned, prior to the implementation of the governance structure that we're currently working with, that came into effect a few years ago, we weren't in compliance with the Not-for-Profit Act, which does regulate national sports organizations. So our current governance structure is compliant, and it did come into effect in January of 2018. And in the onset, there were concerns about the complexity and the effectiveness of the structure when it was created. However, it's really difficult to realistically evaluate how effective it's going to be until we can actually see it in use. So now that we've seen several cycles of the system taking place, time is showing us that there are areas that associate both with a lack of general understanding of the system and then also inherent design problems. So this spring, it was determined by the board that one of the biggest negative factors that we're facing with our governance structure immediately is the confusion that's actually caused by the category voting system. So the governance committee prepared and presented to the board a revised voting member structure earlier this year. In concept, the board supported it. They supported in general the project. But the reason that I say in concept is that, as we always do, once agreed on a direction, we want the leadership, or we task ourselves to consult with stakeholders involved in the project. And on top of that, when you want to change the voting member structure and make that kind of a significant change to the articles, we are going to require what's called a supermajority vote from the voting members, and that means a 2/3 support vote. So after the board's initial support of this proposed revised voting structure project, we decided that there was not enough time available between that point and the AGM. Not only given the impacts of COVID-19, there wouldn't have been time in general even without that impact. So what we wanted to do was, because we are fortunate that we're not rushed, we're not being forced into a time frame like we were the last time around, we have the time to take this process forward into 2 steps. So today we've made some huge strides. We've made some administrative, some minor and some major changes to the bylaws. And that will help remove some of the complexity in the TORs for the voting members. And then again, as Q has mentioned several times, as soon as October comes around, the new board is going to commence a 10 to 12 month assessment project with the categories to assess how the voting member structure is working and how the changes that we want to make to bring it to the 2021 AGM. And again, just on a final note there, I would say that the process that we've undergone so far, I think, has been fairly positive. Q, the chair of the governance committee, Eve, myself, we met with the categories. We presented the bylaw changes. We had the discussions. We saw the areas that were where we were not ready to make decisions. We were able to pull them out. So I think even from a communication perspective, I think we've laid a really strong foundation to how we're going to take the next 10 to 12 months.
Question 4. Voting members have cited their frustrations with the current structure that does not act on their recommendations or value their time. Though they are perceived to be the advocates for their stakeholders, they are advised that their roles are limited to voting on bylaws and electing the board. Will EC finally review the terms of reference for the membership to address these long-standing issues? The voting structure had previously been considered for review. Is that still the case? If so, when? If not, why not?
Thank you. So again, through the bylaw changes that were approved today, it's important for us to recognize that the voting members do have a very specific, I know the question says limited, but it is a very specific and important role. A voting member is a member of our organization who has a vote in how the organization makes fundamental governance decisions. So they're deciding which directors are elected onto the board to lead the organization, and they're deciding what changes to bylaws and even changes to the articles are approved or rejected. So they do not have, in their role as a voting member, an operational job. They make their decisions based on the input they receive from the community, their expertise, their assessment of how the board is doing and its leadership. So they're reviewing the performance, they're reviewing the audited financial statements. So fundamentally, they are the people that are holding the organization and the board accountable with their votes. And other than that, they don't have an operational role. The operational roles are managed by the EC office and our operational committees, also by our affiliates and our PTSO partners as well. So those operational teams, it's a mix of volunteer and staff units that are working together. They're working to create specific things like program development, projects, and actionable change in the organization. And led by the CEO, they're interpreting the strategic plan that the board has put forward, and they're adjusting the work that they're doing to, and the programs that they're creating to align with that plan. And they're also interacting with the community. So the bylaw changes, again, that we have approved today make a really important and a clear connection in many cases between who the operational teams are led by and who they are and the voting member. And I think that reduction of that complexity and the clarity that the most knowledgeable, theoretically the most knowledgeable people who are involved in the organization and involved with our organizational partners, they're the ones that are also wearing a voting member hat and making decisions about the accountability and the future of the organization. So yes, the voting structure has been reviewed. I know I commented on it earlier in the previous questions. Board meetings about the voting member structure, they've been taking place at least since January, and that process that started has led to the bylaw changes today. So it will continue to take us 10 to 12 months to continue to meet with the voting members and bring forward the next series of changes to the 2021 AGM. And again, just as a reminder, it will take a 2/3 supermajority. So it's not a small task, but we're looking forward to how the next months will unfold. So I guess, thank you, Caitlin, for reading those. I guess as we wrap up the Q&A session, are there any final questions before we move on? Okay, so we're going to move to the next item, which is introduction of board directors for the coming year. So I would like to invite Wayne Burwash, who is the chair of the nominations committee, to share some insight on the election process this year.
Thank you, Meg. So yes, it's my honor to introduce the newly elected directors to EC, but first I'd like to make some general comments on the nominating and election process. And maybe I could add some things to what I was going to say based on these questions. that are coming from the categories. I know that the process has some glitches, but having worked with it for a couple of years on the nominating committee, I guess I think it works really quite well. And the main function of the categories, of course, is to elect the board that hopefully will carry out your wishes. And I know communication tends to be a real question, or a real problem, I guess, not a question. And that's one of the main things that we got to iron out. But anyhow, hopefully the people you elect, which is the most important role that you have, will carry out your wishes. And serving on the board, I think you've done an excellent job of choosing the directors. And I must say, without being too biased, being on the board, that we got a great group and are working very, very hard to handle these problems and get these things ironed out. So unfortunately, it just seems to take time. And I know I get frustrated with the time involved in trying to get these things done, being sort of a private enterpriser and person who just makes decisions and goes ahead. But I guess I'd like to assure you that in my mind, the process is working pretty darn well. And the big job you have of voting in a board is being very, very successful. So I just thought I'd make that comment because I appreciate the frustration that's coming from the categories. There's going to be a number of small changes that the nominating committee have been suggesting to the board. The one major thing, or the one real significant glitch I see in the process, has been the selection of the nominating committee representatives from category C. And the reason for that is that category C effectively is repopulated every January. And by the time they get organized and be selecting their representatives moving forward to the nominating committee, we have some timeline problems. So the main thing coming out of suggested changes from the committee is to have this year's committee choose next year's nominating committee members so that they're in place beforehand. And so that is what we're going to propose to, excuse me, propose to the board. But otherwise, I think it's working well. And for sure, I'd like to thank the dedicated work of the 6 members moving forward to the committee. I think they do an excellent job of recruiting and evaluating the nominees and then selecting the candidates to move forward. And so in that respect, the process is working very well. And also would like to thank our staff liaison, Marilyn Gorham, who really helps us in administrative support to get everything done. The other thing is the voting platform that we're now using, Simply Voting, is very user-friendly, and I hope you would all agree that it was that. And so we had all 27 ballots filed and were validated. And so it works very well on our end as scrutineers to tabulate the points and determine the successful candidates. So anyhow, those are just some preambles of my introduction. So But as you know, as far as newly elected directors, 3 of them that are incumbents that were reelected. And I think you would agree after listening to the 3 incumbents, you've heard from them all so far this evening, Meg, Rob, and Q. And you've got to agree that they're an integral part of our board. And so it's very good to have them back on board to continue, and so that we have some excellent continuity in our leadership. So anyhow, I congratulate you all on re-electing those. I fully in favor of them being back on board, and I think we can get a lot done this coming year. So anyhow, thank you. So anyhow, to the point of what I'm supposed to do is to introduce the newly elected directors. And as I said, you've heard from the 3 of them already, but I'd like to start with the one and only really newly elected director, Lisa Robertson, all the way from Regina, Saskatchewan. And so I'd first like to ask her to maybe give a little bit of background and what her thoughts are about EC, and maybe take a minute just to get you familiar with her. So Lisa, I turn it over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to try to turn my video on. I'm in my car, so hopefully everything stays stable. So, all right, excellent. Looks like it's working. So I just want to say that I'm both grateful and excited to be on the board. My background is quite extensive. My entire career has been in sport. And it's been in a variety of different sports. I was at the University of Calgary for 20 years, mainly immersed in varsity sport there, in a fundraising capacity as a fund development officer there, and as a director of fund development for their sports programs. Near the end of my term, I started to get more involved in the administrative aspects. From there, I moved to the Olympic Oval and was able to focus in a one sport environment, which was a breath of fresh air, actually. Got to know speed skating quite well in my 3 years there, and got an amazing experience at both grassroots, from our grassroots community users in the facility up to our Olympic athletes who were also training in the facility, and was able to experience a little bit of what international speed skating and international sport is about in my time there. I'm now in Regina. I have a very long title at the University of Regina, but basically I'm the director of athletics. So I oversee our 13 varsity sport programs here. So extensive sport administration experience, and I'm also part of the governance of what is called U Sport, which is the governing body of university sport in Canada. So have background, obviously we work within a governance model, and we are governed by the same not-for-profit that Equine Canada and other NSOs are governed by. So in addition to my sport experience, I am I think a 42-year participant in the sport of show jumping. I started at a very young age, and I have an immense passion for horses, not just the sport of show jumping, but the actual horse. So this position I felt drawn to, and I'm excited to bring hopefully some of my expertise and some of my experiences to the board. And I look forward to working with the board. Just getting the experience tonight of hearing some of the reports, I'm extremely excited to hear. I'm extremely excited to work with them, but I'm also extremely excited to work with the members. And some of the questions that were posed tonight are incredibly relevant questions. So you know, I look forward to diving into my first board meeting in a couple of weeks. And yeah, I think I was supposed to speak a minute, and I think that's my minute.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's great to have you on board. So I don't know how necessary it is to go through the other 3 incumbents, but I'd like to give them a few seconds to maybe say some words if they would like. So I would go through them. Rob Mitchell, would you like to make any additional comments to what you've already said earlier this evening?
Well, thanks, Wayne. I don't have too much more to say. From the financial side, it is a challenging time for EC as it is for many of us personally and the business we're involved in. It is it's challenging. I do appreciate all the work that Eve and John do in that regard, and the leadership Eve in particular provides as we roll forward in these new circumstances, and look forward to continuing to work with him and the board. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob. Next, Meg, I know you've had quite a long report, but any additional comments?
Thanks, Wayne. Hopefully you're not all tired of hearing from me today. I've already been talking quite a bit. I've been on the board for 3 years. I've been the president for 3 years. I have spent 20 years in the equestrian industry from a career perspective in high performance sport management, about 10 years in the US, 10 years in Canada. Also spent a lot of time in corporate business development and sponsorship sales. I've also been involved in operating events across multiple different disciplines. So from hunter jumper, dressage, eventing, para-dressage, and also Western dressage. My professional career ended a few years ago, and I went out, or I should say my employed professional career ended a few years ago, and I went out on my own. So I'm proud to say I am an entrepreneur in the equestrian space. I'm building a business in marketing and growth acceleration for businesses. So really targeting those who are in the equestrian space and those who want to be in the equestrian space. I've said many times, I'm very passionate about service. I love giving back. I'm very proud of my country and of everything that we've done. And I'm also a proud owner of 2 retired horses. One's a hunter jumper and one is a cow horse that I rescued when living in Colorado. I look forward to completing my second 3-year term with EC, and I hope to continue to apply my expertise to help strengthen the Canadian equestrian sector. And I'm looking forward to working with the team and also with the voting members over the next 3 years.
Okay, thank you, Meg. And the last one, Charles Q, better known just as simply Q. Any additional comments, Q?
No, I'm just looking forward to the challenging conversations we're going to have over the next couple months, and hopefully we all walk away at the end of it with a smile on our face.
All right, sounds good. Okay, well, thank you, Wayne. Thank you, everybody. This comes to the last section of the meeting, and this part always goes really fast. So before you all start dialing off, I just want to thank you again for your time today and for the time that you give every day to the sport and to the industry in Canada. I think we've had a very constructive AGM. With nothing further to discuss, I'm going to wish you all a wonderful evening and a wonderful week, and I'm going to adjourn the Equestrian Canada 2020 Annual General Meeting. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good night, everyone.